Boston, 1958. It was raining outside. A small house, curtains drawn. Inside sat a woman who had not spoken a single word to the media in over 3 years. After her husband's death, government officials had come to her door. They placed papers in front of her. She signed. And then silence. No interviews, no statements, no tears in public. But that night, she opened the door. A young reporter was standing outside. Wallace Coburn, a small name at a local newspaper. He didn't write for big publications. He covered local stories, weddings, funerals, small human interest pieces. And Marie Byrd, the widow of America's most celebrated polar explorer, let that young man inside. 2 afternoons of conversation followed. That interview became an article, roughly 1,400 words, published in a regional Sunday paper. 3 photographs included. Printed on Sunday. Gone by Tuesday. Every copy was bought up. The microfilm page was missing from library archives. Wallace Coburn was reassigned within a month. And when researchers tried to track him down years later, they were told he had died in 1971 of a heart condition. He was only 43 years old. So the question is, what did Marie Byrd tell that reporter? And why was it so dangerous that the entire American establishment erased that article from the record within 72 hours? If you want the answer, stay with me. Because this is not just the story of a reporter and a widow. This is a story that leads directly to one of the biggest secrets in America's official history. And once you go inside it, you don't come back out the same person you were before. Let's go. The textbook version is simple. Richard Evelyn Byrd, U.S. Navy Admiral. First manned flight over the North Pole in 1926. First man to reach the South Pole in 1929. Led multiple Antarctic expeditions. National hero. Died of a heart ailment at his Boston home on March 11, 1955. That's what you were taught in school. But the man who actually existed was far more complicated than that. Byrd came from one of the oldest aristocratic families in Virginia. His brother, Harry Flood Byrd, was a United States Senator, one of the most powerful political operators in Washington. The Byrd family was so deeply embedded in America's institutional fabric that Richard's military career was almost predetermined from birth. By the time he was 40, Richard Byrd had personal relationships with 3 sitting presidents, with Navy leadership, with the directors of multiple intelligence agencies, with the heads of the country's major scientific organizations. When Byrd spoke about Antarctica, he wasn't speaking as an explorer. He was speaking as a senior government official with access to information that almost nobody else had. And then there's one more thing. His most famous achievement, the 1926 North Pole flight, may not have been real. The personal diary recovered after his death contained navigational entries that, when examined by independent researchers in the 1990s, placed the aircraft well short of 90 degrees north before he turned back. The sextant readings showed he had not actually reached the geographic pole that day. This analysis was published in a small academic journal. Mainstream press ignored it. The National Geographic Society quietly removed it from their reading lists. Think about what that means. A man who knew for 30 years that his most celebrated achievement contained a lie. A man who understood better than anyone how public memory gets adjusted. When a man like that decides to tell the truth, you listen. Less than a year had passed since the end of World War II. America was supposedly demobilizing. Peacetime was arriving. And yet a massive fleet was dispatched toward Antarctica. Not just to explore. 13 ships, 1 aircraft carrier, 1 submarine, more than 33 aircraft, approximately 4,700 personnel. This was not the size of a scientific expedition. This was the size of a small invasion force. Operation Highjump. Official purpose: cold weather equipment testing and scientific research. The mission was planned for 6 to 8 months. They came back in 8 weeks. Why? The Navy's official statement: unexpectedly severe weather conditions. But internal documents partially declassified in the 1990s told a different story. Aircraft losses that were never publicly accounted for. At least 2 pilots confirmed dead with no official explanation provided. And then, the strangest detail of all, every single survivor was individually debriefed, and every single one was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. A non-disclosure agreement after a peacetime scientific expedition. Why? In 1973, a Navy pilot wrote a letter to his son, a letter that was found only after his death. He wrote that in Antarctica, they had encountered something he was forbidden to describe. He wrote that for the rest of his career, he remained certain that the public version of Operation Highjump bore almost no resemblance to what had actually happened on the ice. That pilot is gone now, but the letter exists. March 1947. Richard Byrd gave an interview to a Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, Santiago. He said, "It is my view that it is urgent for the United States to take protective measures against the possibility of an invasion by aircraft coming from the polar regions." He said Antarctica was not the frozen wasteland people imagined. He said there was something there. And he said the next war, if it came, would be fought against an enemy with the ability to fly from pole to pole at incredible speed. In 1947, the Cold War had barely begun. This interview was published in El Mercurio. A few American outlets briefly picked it up. Then it disappeared too. The American press did not follow up. The Navy did not comment. And Byrd himself never spoke publicly in those terms again. The straightforward question is this. A U.S. admiral sent on that mission by his own government said in 1947 that an attack from polar regions was a real possibility. And nobody asked Admiral, "What exactly did you see down there?" People who knew Byrd said that in the years before his death, he had become a different person entirely. He stopped sleeping properly. He stopped attending social events. He began sending strange, incomplete, frightened letters to old colleagues. In 1954, a Navy captain who had served with Byrd on multiple expeditions recalled a dinner. Byrd had drawn the curtains in his own home and told his friend of 20 years, sober, calm, and certain, "I have seen things in the Antarctic that I cannot write about, that I cannot even fully describe. And I believe the official record of my own expeditions has been altered." A man who knew exactly how public memory gets altered was saying that his own memory had been altered. Think about how terrifying that must have been. When Byrd died on March 11, 1955, his diaries went immediately into Navy custody. His papers were inventoried by government officials. And within 48 hours, people arrived at Marie Byrd's home. They did not fully identify themselves. Friends of the family later said they appeared to be intelligence officers. Marie Byrd signed something. What she signed has never been made public. The result was that for the next year and a half, Marie Byrd told nobody anything, absolutely nothing. Then, in the spring of 1958, Wallace Coburn knocked on her door, and Marie Byrd let him in. Why? Why a young, unimportant, local reporter? Years later, in 2003, a niece of Marie Byrd came forward in an interview. She said her aunt had told her directly, she chose Coburn because he was young, because he was unimportant, because she believed that if she chose someone small enough, the article might slip through unnoticed. She was wrong. The article did not slip through. But she had tried. The article itself is gone. But fragments remain. People who read it in those 72 hours. Notes that Coburn kept. Letters that Marie Byrd wrote privately in later years to people close to her. And when those fragments are pieced together, this is what emerges. Marie Byrd told Coburn that her husband had been deeply troubled in his final years by what he had witnessed on his last 2 expeditions. She said Richard told her repeatedly, Antarctica is not what the public believes it to be. She said Richard had described seeing structures. His own word. Structures. She said Richard had told her that beneath the ice there were remnants of a civilization older than anything in the historians' records. She said Richard told her the ice was not eternal, that what is ice today was once something else entirely. And she told Coburn that the U.S. government through Operation Highjump and other classified missions had recovered something. Documents. Physical artifacts. Things that would rewrite the entire history humanity had been taught. That was the information that vanished within 72 hours. And here I want to stop and say something directly. This is not just a strange story built on thin air. Certain things can be independently verified. First, Edith Marshall, a librarian. In 1962, she wrote a letter to her sister, a letter that still exists today in a private collection, verified by independent handwriting analysis describing how a man arrived claiming to represent the State Historical Society. Without proper authorization, he removed that specific Sunday edition page from the library archive. Marshall wrote that he was very insistent. Second, Theodore Brennan, copy editor at the newspaper that printed the original article. In 1989, he gave a recorded interview to a graduate student. He was 81 years old, clear, sober, and specific. He remembered the Coburn article. He remembered laying out the Sunday edition. He said that on Tuesday morning, the publisher called an unscheduled meeting and announced that the article contained errors and that all remaining copies should be returned to the warehouse. Brennan asked what the errors were. The publisher said it was not his concern. Brennan said the publisher looked, in his own words, like a man who had been threatened. No correction was ever printed. No official retraction. The Sunday edition simply vanished from the bound archive. And that same week, 2 men in dark suits visited the office and met privately with the publisher. Nobody knew who they were. Third, in 2014, Freedom of Information requests confirmed a specific Navy file number. An archivist named Caroline Vetta had told a colleague that in the late 1980s, she had been instructed to remove a bundle of correspondence from a sealed Navy file related to the 1955 inventory of Admiral Byrd's papers. The bundle was transferred to a secondary storage facility whose location was not part of the public catalog. The file number was verified. The transfer date was verified. Where the file was sent has never been disclosed. These are not conspiracy blogs. These are real people, real documents, real file numbers. And every time someone got close to the answer, the door closed. If none of this was real, why was the article pulled within 72 hours? If Marie Byrd was simply a grieving widow confused about her late husband's state of mind, why did the government care? If Operation Highjump was truly just a scientific expedition, why did survivors sign NDAs? If Antarctica is genuinely a frozen wasteland with nothing of significance, why is large portions of its airspace still effectively closed today? There is no population to protect, no official military base, no strategic oil reserve being extracted. And yet, you cannot go there freely. You cannot fly over certain areas. You cannot drill without international permits that are routinely denied. That is unusual. That demands an explanation that nobody in the official record has ever provided. Wallace Coburn left journalism in 1965. He took a job at an insurance company in Hartford. For the rest of his life, he kept a single locked folder in his desk drawer. When he died in 1971 at the age of 43, the folder was gone. His daughter told a researcher in 1998 that she used to see her father open that folder alone at night and read through it quietly. She asked him about it once. He said, "It's something I did a long time ago, and it's not something I'm supposed to talk about." She was 12 years old. She didn't ask again. 3 years later, he was gone. The folder with him. Marie Byrd tried once to get the truth out. The system stopped her in 3 days, but the librarian wrote her letter. The copy editor gave his interview. The daughter watched her father read from that folder in the dark, and the niece in 2003, in her 70s, with nothing to gain, sat down and said, "My aunt told me that Richard, in his final years, had become convinced that the history of the human race is not what we have been told, and that Antarctica holds the key to understanding what really happened." Somewhere inside the records of the United States government, the actual reports from Operation Highjump exist. The classified documents from Byrd's final months exist. The transcripts from the people who visited Marie Byrd's home in the spring of 1955 exist. They have not been declassified. They may never be, or they may have already been destroyed. We cannot know. But one thing is certain. Marie Byrd spoke only once. The system silenced her in 72 hours. But the seeds that widow planted in 1958 sitting across from a young reporter she hoped was too small to notice, those seeds are still alive. And the question she raised, the one her husband carried alone for years, still has no answer. Not yet. If this is the kind of investigation you came here for, the stories that get pulled from the front page after a single printing, you know what to do. Subscribe to the channel. New videos every week. We go where the official record refuses to.